system in the city. They looked at the poor, failing public school system, and they looked at the high level of corruption that existed within the city. And their view was that these kinds of factors contributed to the rebellion. And if, in fact, Newark, which was the largest city in the state, if Newark was to rebound, then clearly something would have to be done as it relates to those kinds of issues. Simultaneously that you had that discussion going on, you also had a discussion going on in the higher education community in the state of New Jersey regarding the development of community colleges. And there was a movement that was already going forward simultaneously when the rebellion took place, that we should be developing community colleges throughout the state of New Jersey. So at the same time that both of these things were going forward, you had a climate that existed where the issues as related to the black community and the issues as related to the development of community colleges appeared to be on a track where they could be mutually advantageous in the educational environment of the community and also the educational environment of the state. So ideally that would have been great, except that as the community college movement began to develop, something else, a third arm came into play, and that is the arm of Essex County politics. Essex County is probably, next to Hudson County, the most political county in the state. It has a history of being highly political. And the political, and at the county level, there were those elements who saw an opportunity to develop the community college, but for the community college not necessarily to be developed solely for educating the urban community, but that the community college could be set up in such a way that it would benefit the political structure in the county. So you have these three dynamics all going on at the same time that the community college, as the community college is beginning to be developed. So that was the first thing, the 67 riots, all right? September 30th, 1968, Essex County College opens its doors at 31 Clinton Street, right? The opening of 31 Clinton Street, we opened up, and I gotta get some of these documents, we opened up with approximately 2,600 students. And what was interesting about when the college opened up, 3,500, we opened up with 3,500 students, all right? When we opened up with these 3,500 students, what was so interesting about the student body is that the student body was not predominantly black. The student body opened was predominantly a Caucasian student body. Now, that presented some other kinds of issues because on one hand, you had the view, as was stated by Bob Vaughn, that the college, if it was situated in Newark, would not survive in Newark. And therefore, if it failed in Newark, there would be an opportunity to move it to the suburban community where the view is that it would have been successful. The problem with that is that once the college opened up, and it opened up with such a large Caucasian community, the county, which was predominantly Caucasian, began to raise some serious issues about the fact that we now cannot let it fail, but we can, in fact, and should move it, all right? Now, you probably say, Ms. Richforth, you know, that's not what appears to be in writing. What I'm telling you is what the undercurrent was that was leading to so much of the kind of upheaval that began to take place and begin to manifest itself over the next few years, all right? So the college opens up at 31 Clinton Street, a walk-up that was very uncomfortable. We did things at 31 Clinton Street that we wonder how it was even possible to survive. If you wanted to register, you had to get on Clinton Street at approximately, I'd say about 6 o'clock in the morning, and you would line up from West Market Street all the way up to Clinton Street, and then you'd have to start winding your way around the steps until you got up to the registrar's office. And you stay there and you get your card to go register yourself, and you have to come all the way back down to the next level of registering. People would actually stand in line for 4, 5, and 6 hours and climb 8 and 9 flights of steps just to register, And it was because people really wanted to come to school. They really wanted to come to school. The next thing we began to see that began to shape Essex County College is what we call the 1969 demands of the concerned students of Essex County College. The concerned students of Essex County College, there were two groups. The first group was an African American group, all right? They presented the first set of demands to the administration of the college, or they drafted, let me back it up. They drafted the first set of demands, all right? Let me just cover some of those demands for you. Here we go, right here. Now, the reason why I'm spending some time on this is because what I'd like you to understand is that Essex has become what Essex has become because of a level of cooperation and collaboration that began to take place at the very foundation of this institution. The first set of demands ever submitted was on 1969, the demands of the concerned students of Essex County College. Who were the concerned students of Essex County College? The concerned students of Essex County College were predominantly black students, African American students, all right? They started out with roughly maybe about 100 and 110 students. They came together and they drafted what they considered to be concerns that students should have addressed. Now, what were they? Number one, they wanted reduced prices for the food in the cafeteria, all right? They wanted students to be allowed to freely disseminate brochures. They also wanted to have a black president. They wanted to have greater input into the development of who was going to represent student affairs. Out of all the administrators that sat at the college at that time, there were only 2 black administrators in the entire administrative realm of the institution. So the African American students came up with the fact that they were challenging administration on the lack of black representation. At the same time that they came forward with some demands, the Caucasian students also came forward with some demands. Now, what became so beautiful about this whole dynamic is that the Caucasian students and the African American students came together and sat down and began to draft the final listing of what was going to be submitted to the administration. So what I want to show you is that even at its very formative stages of this institution, there was interracial cooperation around things that the student body felt was so important. And what was so interesting about this is that the external environment of the county didn't realize that there was this level of coming together and this level of collaboration and cooperation. So that laid the foundation for some future things that we began to see when it became necessary for the student body to come together and lead the charge in terms of student strikes and things like that. They were totally organized and together as one group. When the demands were finally put into, they were documented, reduced prices for food in cafeterias, allow students to freely disseminate brochures. Students were not allowed at that time to disseminate what you wanted to disseminate. In other words, it was very difficult for students to get flyers out, difficult for students getting any information out because the administration of the institution was not open to or supportive of students really technically having free speech, all right? We also a free tutoring center with paid tutors. Now we laugh about the fact that we have academic foundations and we have tutoring. Back in those days, students did not have access to tutoring. And so one of the demands of the concerned students was that we have a tutoring site and we have free tutoring. In addition to that, they also were visionary enough to say that we should begin to, as college students, have an opportunity to go into the public school system and also provide tutoring in the public school system so that we could try to have an impact on the fact that these kids were coming out of the public schools ill-prepared to do anything out of the North school system. So that concept was there. And we wanted student representation on academic dismissal committees. When students were dismissed because of academic performance, students had no input into that process at all. Currently, we have the Judiciary Committee here, correct? We do have a Judiciary Committee here. We do. Dr. Reed is part of the Judiciary Committee. He sits on the Judiciary Committee. So therefore, before a student can be dismissed from this institution, the student has an opportunity to have members of their peer group there, as well as faculty members are there, as well as people from the administration are there. And so the students have some opportunity for some level of appeal, some level of redress. Prior to this, students would just be dismissed from Essex County College, and they had absolutely no redress whatsoever. All right? And then also $5,000 to renovate or decorate the student lounge. That may not sound like that's a very important thing, but if you're a student, you're in this college, and you're at 31 Clinton Street, which was not the garden spot of the Western world, and there was no place for students to gather, then the idea of saying to the administration you needed $5,000 to decorate a place where students could come and feel comfortable and be a part of it. So what we have here is two things. Number one, we have the first set of demands ever presented to the administration. Two, we had it done by a student group that was an interracial student group, which meant that from the very beginning, any attempt to challenge the administration of the college that was put forth was put forth in a unified manner. And that is extremely important for what began to go on with the college. Next is 1969, 1970, the organizing of the People's Council. The People's Council grew out of the concerned students of Essex County College. If you look at the demands of the People's Council, which we'll cover, and you look at the demands of the concerned students of Essex County College, one of the things you find which is so exciting is that the People's Council took the demands of the concerned students and expanded upon them in such a way that instead of being very parochial, now the demands became a lot more global in terms of things that the People's Council saw were major issues for the entire Essex County College community. And here again, we're talking about going into an organization that actually drafted a vision statement for the college and going into that organization as a unified body of people. Because what happened with the People's Council was made up of students, the People's Council was made up of faculty members, and the People's Council was made up of some support staff who were not afraid of the administration. Now, the administration of the college during that period of time was a rough operation. They would fire people at will, they would intimidate people at will, and they made it almost impossible if you challenged the administration to remain here at Essex County College. So a lot of the support staff did not have the protection or feel they had the protection that the faculty had. So a lot of them were kind of behind the scenes being supported. And of course the students were very, very vocal, and so they really didn't have to fear anything. So we began to see the development of People's Council. Now the ideas of the People's Council was a very democratic organization. It was organized as a result of votes that were taking place. These are some of the individuals who put their names into nomination for membership in the People's Council. Now you can tell how old this stuff is. Now how did I find it? I was going through some boxes, because my husband had passed away. I was going through some boxes, and way back in the basement, I opened a box about 4 weeks ago, and all this stuff was in the box. And I sat down and started reading it. I said, oh my God, look at this. These are individuals who stood for election to be members of the People's Council, all right? This document is the 10-point manifesto of the People's Council that was written by the Essex County College students, by those faculty members, mainly individuals that I'm going to show you the picture of, Alan Block and Proctor and Marjorie Beth Brown. These, anybody remember those folks? Yes, okay, you remember them? All right. They were the ones who came alongside the students. Now understand something, the People's Council was a student-driven organization. But because they were student-driven, they really didn't know how to galvanize a lot of how to approach what they wanted to do. They were still focusing on parochial issues. It took Alan Block and Ray Proctor to come along and say to them, the issues that you are faced with are larger issues. They are institutionalized issues of racism. It is classism, all right? And you need to begin to address that if you're going to talk about changing the direction of a college. And so from that group came the People's Council. A little bit about the People's Council. The People's Council was very anti what was perceived in any way as being part of what the administration had control over. So therefore, it was felt that ECHO, which was the student paper, it was felt that ECHO was in some ways an arm of the administration. So the People's Council developed our own newspaper, and we developed it and sold it for 10 cents a piece. All right, we have some of the copies. But this happens to be, and I think it's probably the last remaining sign. I don't think anybody else has it. I didn't even know I had it. But this is the People's Council poster was left of it. And as you can very well see, our whole image was, we're going to fight the power structure. And as you can see, it is black and white together. Black and white together. All right? I'll just put this over here. Let's try not to touch it. Okay? All right, so we then move into organizing the People's Council. Now, what's so unique about the People's Council is this. The People's Council, the entire manifesto, if you look at every single thing that's happened in Essex County College in the last 40-odd years, we can point to everything that exists in this institution now can be traced back to this document. Even things you never think about. And there's something that, how many people are faculty members here? How many people have ever sat on the divisional curriculum committees? All right, guess what? In 1970, there were no divisional curriculum committees. In 1970, the College Curriculum Committee, college-wide, consisted of no faculty members whatsoever. The entire College Curriculum Committee was made up of administrators. There were no divisional college-wide curriculum, no divisional curriculum committees. Anybody have any idea who the first divisional curriculum committee was in the college? And led the fight that allowed the other divisions to organize curriculum committees.
Probably social science.
Social science. The social science division held an election in 1970. Bob, come on up here because you got to help us. All right, come on, Bob. In 1970, the social science division held an election in the department, and we elected faculty members in our department to form our college, our divisional curriculum committee. When the election was held, there was such an enormous backlash from the administration. An enormous amount of pressure was put on the faculty members. And what they tried to do was intimidate the faculty members in the division so that we would back off of what we had done. Because at this point, the way curriculum was developed in the college, it was developed basically by administration. Their attitude was, this is what you're going to do and this is what you do. All right? We stayed united. We refused to back down. They backed off. And as a result of that, other divisions in the college began to elect their own curriculum committees. All right? So you have a college-wide curriculum committee with faculty on it because you had a division that decided we were going to vote on ours and then put pressure upstairs to force the college to begin to put faculty members on the college-wide curriculum committee. All right?
You remember when they didn't want any black studies, and we got a group of about 40 students, and all they did was go up to the surrounding table, breathe heavy. Out of air. we were terrible.
We were terrible, all right? So we had the organizer of the People's Council, Alan Block. I'll show you Alan's picture in a moment, Ray Proctor, and Mary Beth Rare. Now let me explain something to you. Some people will say the only reason why Alan and Ray and Mary Beth participated in the People's Council was because they were getting ready to get fired. Well, they were getting ready to get fired. They were getting ready to get fired because they didn't have master's degrees. Hey, what can I tell you? They can't even teach us. We wanted to be taught. But what I will say to you is this. Alan and Ray were very close to getting their master's degrees. Now, you're probably saying, well, wait a minute, you could teach at Essex at that time without a master's degree? Yes, you could. They were very close to getting their master's, but the reason why they were fired had less to do with the fact that they didn't have the master's and were close to getting it than the fact that they were leading the charge in shaping the response of the students to what was perceived as being the power structure of this county and the power structure of this institution. So we began to sit down, and on January 8, 1970, and it's very, very fragile, we drafted the People's Council's manifesto and 10-point program, which I say is the vision statement of Essex County College. Because I have not seen this document in 40-something years. And about 3 weeks ago when I found it and started reading it, and I read it to Dr. Reed, Dr. Reed's comments were, oh, this is eerie. It's eerie, because I didn't write it, but you know, those of us who participated in the process. But when you read it, and then we began to look at various things that were going on in the college today, we could trace it right back to this document. So we're just briefly going to go through it. Bob, you want to tell them how it opens?
Well, the first sentence, that was the newsletter. Life, excuse me, I'm a clerk. Life in America is a bitch. That's the first sentence. That's the first sentence. All right? If you are black or brown, it's always been a bitch since American history has been written with the blood of people of color. If you're white, young, and born of working parents, America has always been a bitch since this country was built on and maintains itself through the oppression of the working class by the rich cats who control it. Whoa. I won't say anything more. Nothing more. Nothing more. All right? So it's a 3-page preamble. A 3-page preamble before we get into basically the demands. And I want you, when I read a demand to you, I'm going to ask you, based on this demand, what departments exist in the college today? That'll be okay? Okay. Okay, well, no, this is easy. We demand that the move to Verona be canceled, and that whatever new facilities are necessary be located in Newark in order to maintain open admissions. All right? Why has Essex County College been the main institution that provides 90% of minority enrollment in the state of New Jersey? Why? Because this college stayed where? In Newark. In Newark. That was the first demand that we placed in the manifesto, that this institution would not be moved to Verona, this institution would remain in the city of Newark, this institution would be the entity that would, we feel that in this time of racial and class polarization, that whites and blacks, urban and suburban, meet together in Newark rather than some isolated retreat in the middle of nowhere. All right? So this entire thing needs to be looked at and be able to see. Here again, very early, we didn't have this massive division. It started with the students coming together. And it was a wonderful thing because the black kids were doing our thing and the white kids were doing their thing, and it was found out that both had grievances. It was 4 of them that met. They sat, put the grievances together, went back to their respective communities, and came back and said, we are a unified body. This is what we want. All right? Another thing happened. The first student activities director, he was big.
Yes. Speak to him.
And he tried to pit the Italian students against the black students.
Yes.
And the black students and the Italian students got together, and they threw him out.
Yes. We have some things in the papers. As I said, with some of these papers, they're not politically correct, are they, Bob?
But I give credit to Mrs. Birch, who sat on the Davis Commission. It was 3 people, and she was outvoted, but she put her foot down and said, that school belongs in Newark. And they proceeded, we opened up 31 Clinton Street. But as the bids started coming in for the cost of the campus, it began to go up high. And so everyone said, well, let's look for an alternative. One alternative, you know, the senior citizens down on Broad Street,
Yeah.
down by Lincoln Park.
Yeah.
They looked at that.
They looked at that site. The
And
housing authority owned that, so therefore they couldn't go there.
And then they decided they wanted to go, and let's try Verona again. And that's where the students perform in a heroic way. Then we went over to the Board of School, Board of Freeholders. They were standing on the rafters.
We got some photographs of that too. And also Ms. Burks, that was one of the things I have pointed here about the top things that happened in this college was her motion that took 30 minutes to get a second to, all right? The second demand, students and faculty acting as groups and or through individuals they elect must have all the decision-making power in firing, rehiring teachers to ensure that good teaching is rewarded and poor teaching is eliminated. What do we have in this college today that is reflective of that? Those of you that sit in, that are in committee, that sit in your divisions. Every division has what? Retention and promotion committees. You owe the existence of them to number 2. All right? Okay? Number 3, we demand that anyone who has received 60 credits by the end of the winter semester be allowed to graduate, and we said that is his own discretion. The reason for that is there was such massive confusion in the registrar's office regarding students' records, regarding what courses students had taken, until it was absolutely ridiculous. You had people with 75, 80, and 90 credits could not graduate. And it was affecting these students' lives. And so part of what was stated here was that if they've got 60 credits, then guess what? They should be able to graduate. Now, we just went through accreditation and restructuring of most of our academic programs. And most of our academic programs, it takes how many credits to graduate? 63. 63. We were way ahead of our time. Way ahead of our time. All right? Next, we demand that the college expand its urban-oriented programs. Very, very, very important. What organization do we have on campus that deals with urban programs now?
Urban Issues.
We have the Urban Issues Institute. We have Community and Continuing Education. We have satellite sites. We've got the Focus Center. We've got the Ironbound. We have teaching classes down at the Union area. We have programs all over that are oriented in the urban area as well as an urban institute. And that comes from the idea that the view was that this particular entity could do something more than just be an Ivy League or Ivy Tower institution, that you couldn't sit in the middle of Newark the way Rutgers and NJIT did and act like somehow or another you weren't in Newark. And we didn't want that to happen with Essex. And so as a result of that, we pushed the idea of having urban-oriented programs. And we demand the college make available immediately $50,000 for the establishment of a daycare center for students and staff. Do we have a daycare center? Yeah. I mean, this is eerie. This is eerie. I mean, I sat down and read this thing a couple of weeks ago, and I'm saying, oh my God, did we read this stuff? So maybe it was eerie because maybe there was a great area of force that was having us put stuff on paper. But what's so interesting is that the students and the faculty members, many who have never really read this, nevertheless they had the same view of where we wanted to take the institution. All right?
1985. Just want to mention that for the daycare.
Oh, 1985 for the daycare, 1970 the manifesto.
But that was another big contribution by Dr. Youngberg, because he was determined to have, now he was under a lot of criticism because that wasn't necessarily in the higher education. He was an innovator. Most colleges did not have a daycare center. But if you look at WISE, you look at training, you look at the daycare center, I can go over about 6 programs. Those students would not be able to come if they put the children on. So that became part of the enrollment and opportunity center that Essex is when that took place.
No. You're Bob, you're here. We've been fighting how many years? We've done some stuff together. Remember the meeting where we were told to leave the room as clergy?
Yeah.
There was a meeting that was held about something that was very, very controversial. and they were getting ready to do something that was politically incorrect. But we had to make sure that Dr. Yamba knew nothing about the political incorrectness of it. And it was getting so sticky that they even told Bob and I, since we were clergy, to leave the room. They felt it would compromise our integrity.
But there were some personalities in the history of the college too. Dr. Lingworth Gunther,
Yes.
good example. He was a great teacher, still is a great teacher.
Yes.
He was a person who would, and that problem we dealt with, it was his idea to deal with it in a way, and it worked. He is a great writer, and he inspired students. Ray Proctor, all the early faculty, they taught students how to interact in the board meetings. Remember? They used to say, that's ludicrous. Students didn't even know what was ludicrous, but they were taught. Because the Urban Institute used to take them over and train them how to interrupt, how to keep the board meetings going, and they would raise their hands, they would ask questions, and of course, Ray Proctor was a very articulate individual. He'd get up with these cavalier statements, he would use words that would just be fascinating. And the greatest thing was when Ray Proctor and the president of the National Bank, who was our chair, yeah, they got them to sit down for lunch, and that was a heated, hot lunch. But they began to understand each other. And of course, during that time, physically, Springfield Avenue was like a bombed out city.
Because all that area had been burned down, so having to come down Springfield Avenue to reach 31 Clinton Street oftentimes was a major challenge in itself, and people were very frightened. Let me just finish this and we'll take questions, all right? We demand that Essex County College move immediately to become a four-year college. Well, we're not a four-year college, and for you young people who have now come on as the second wave of moving the institution, one day you are going to be a four-year college. It may take a long time. It took a long time for some of these things that we've talked about thus far to happen, but it can happen. And in order for it to happen, it would have to change the charter under which community colleges were developed in the state. However, one of the things that I found out when I started looking at the demand of the concerned students of Essex County College, there was a meeting that those students held with the Board of Trustees subcommittee at that time. And the members of that Board of Trustees subcommittee indicated that they were going to set up a committee to lobby with state legislators to change the constitution of community colleges so Essex could become a four-year college. That never happened. But the reality of it is, at some point, this may happen, and you guys can look back on the fact that back in the 70s, someone brought it up, all right? We demand adequate full counseling staff, solely devoted to transfer problems. We demand a guaranteed transfer without loss of credit for all students who successfully complete their work at ECC. What do we have now? What do we have now? We have what?
Lampet law.
We have the Lampet bill, which at the state level, we also have what? Articulation agreements with other colleges, and we have a push that even middle states insisted that we expand, and that was transfer counseling students properly so the students will be able to go and leave here without losing things. And what we find out is that we have a whole transfer retention area of the college now. That was a problem then. We identified it as a problem, and the college has gotten better with these transfer items.
There's one decision I made which could have been controversial, but I think I was right on target, and history has proven. When I was academic vice president, I saw them trying to take budget money away from Essex because it was Newark-based. So I told Charles Laval to go and look in the western part of the county and see if we couldn't find somewhere where we could open up like a branch extension center. And we were fought by the colleges up there. I mean, we were fought by the
Caldwell
College. They fought us like mad. But we established that as a beachhead. But I mean, I must confess, after all these years, one of the reasons was that if they started cutting, then we would cut there first. And that's always been perceived as so-called white campus. Not the case today. It's provided as much opportunity from residents of Montclair, Bloomfield, they come up to the Western Essex campus. There was something I got noticed, and then I'll be quiet. Last week, something hit me about the appreciation of Essex, what particularly the social science division did during those days. When Antoinette Tuff used her skills not to sympathize, but to empathize with that young man who was about to go in and shoot 500 children with his AK-47. She talked to him with an empathetic style. I know what you're going through. I've been through it. I've been through worse problems than you. I can identify with that. And if you notice the way she did it, she's been called from experts now to be called in and to help train people. But that was something I picked up. I said, you know, that's something we did at Essex, particularly social science. We felt the students' needs. You understand what I'm saying? It's that empathy that goes with teaching.
And that's why we were able to, I think, begin to fashion a document such as this. Now, this one sounds like it doesn't have anything to do with today, but I'm going to ask you to tell me what exists in this college as a result of this. We demand the resignation of the Board of Trustees, which we didn't get, and the establishment of a new board of 5 students, 3 faculty, 2 staff, and 2 members of the community, elected by students, faculty, and staff on a 1-vote basis. We also demand the new board convene open hearings to restructure decision-making at the college. What do we have at the college now? First of all, you have a representative from the student body to the Board of Trustees. You have a representative of the faculty to the Board of Trustees. And you have various standing committees that are involved in the decision-making process of this institution. You got APAC and ADAC and all of these various groups. The reason why you have them is because most of the decision-making that takes place in the institution, especially as it relates to academic issues, come from the bottom up. At this time, all those decisions came from the top down, all right? And we demanded that you open up that process so that the faculty and students have some input into what it is that we are doing in the institution. So we have a tremendous amount of academic policy planning council. We have APAC, we have college curriculum committee. We have all these organizations now that are committees that are designed to ensure that there is a tremendous amount of involvement from the bottom up in what we do as an institution. And it came from this particular domain. Let me just finish this quickly and then we'll go into some questions and a couple of little things we also want to show. We didn't get this. We demand the immediate resignation of President Ellis White and Vice President J. Harry Smith. We demand the creation of an elected student faculty grievance committee to oversee the hiring, firing, pending the creation of new decision-making structures. Well, you know, here again, we might not have gotten that, but intrinsic to that request was the idea that you cannot run this institution without a regard for the people that work here, for the students who learn here, and for the community in which it sits. And I think that this has driven a lot of things that we do in this college. We are extremely community-minded in this college. I think when people come from other colleges, they're very surprised at how community-minded we are. They're also very surprised at how much concern we have for student opinions. We take into account what students feel. Even if I don't agree, and I think all of you here don't agree with what students may do or say, I think that we do pay attention to what the students' concerns are. That was, and we demand the creation of an elected student faculty review panel to evaluate all courses, scheduling procedures, requirements, and the grading system. That sounds kind of interesting considering we just came out of Middle States. And one of the things that Middle States wanted us to do was develop a whole process of assessing what it is that we do. How do we know that an A is an A? What constitutes an A? How can we prove that our students know what we say they know? All right? And so the assessment, the idea that there needed to be some type of formalized assessment. Back in the 70s, we weren't calling it assessment, but we knew we needed somebody to take a look at what we were doing. And the faculty needed to come together with the students to look at what we thought we were being successful and what we were not being successful at. And then finally, and this I think everybody in here can relate to, we demand that the administration make known immediately that it welcomes the non-faculty employees starting their own union, and that it will not attempt to block such an organization by intimidating non-faculty employees. Now, how many people belong to unions here? Everybody, in 1970. All right, so what I just want to share with you is that we look at a lot of things that we have done in Essex County College, and almost everything that we've done in some way, shape, or form flows from this particular document. Now, January 21st, 1970, Board of Trustees meeting, Dr. Mary Birch. Bob, you want to deal with that? That was the board meeting where the vote was taken to have the Board of Trustees of this college table any discussion on relocating this institution into Verona until the campus that we're sitting in now was totally built, until we were in this building. That particular meeting took place January 21st, 1970, and it was across the street at the County Hall of Records. They had refused to allow the college, particularly the students, to come into the freeholder chambers. So what they did was they willfully, with malice of forethought, moved the meeting into one of the small judge courtrooms, knowing full well that the 300 students that had come over to the meeting would not be able to get into that courtroom. And they felt that that was going to deter the students. Well, that didn't happen, because what happened was the students forced their way into the courtroom. The students stood up on the judge's bench. They stood all over the chairs. They did well over $300 to $400 worth of damage. They refused to allow Ferguson, who was the chairman of the board, they refused to allow them to speak. They refused to allow any of the Board of Trustee members to go forward with the agenda. Things were so bad until they had them totally backed up against the wall. And here's a photograph of them backed up against the wall, if you want to see it. And they could not move. They refused to allow them. And the meeting went on for almost 7 to 8 hours. Mary Birch, this lady right here, the Birch Auditorium is named after her. She had the courage to introduce the motion that there be an immediate vote taken to table any discussion of moving Essex County College to Verona until the megastructure was built and until the megastructure was occupied. It took 30 minutes before she could get a second to that motion. She refused to back down, and she refused to change the motion because they wanted to amend the motion to simply say something to the effect that there would be a temporary locating of the campus to Verona, and while we look for suitable other sites in Newark. She absolutely refused. All right, and this is Mr. Ferguson, who was the chairman. He was the head of what was First National State Bank, and she refused to budge. After 30 minutes of not budging, after the students, by this time they had called in the police, they had called in the sheriff's department, and the students' position at this point was that we would die first. And after a while, the vote was taken, and the vote was 6-0. We would not move this college. And so these are some of the people that participated in that, even though we did cause it, and this day it was a lot of money. Freeholder Raymond Scabell says, "I'm appalled by wanton and careless disregard of public property. They have broken up $300 worth of furniture." We did. That we did.
But we had other threats too. There was one proposal that we become part of what is called Newark University.
Yes.
And that would have wiped us out. Then there was a dean here one time who felt that we should be a remedial institution only. He's gone.
He's gone. He's gone.
And many have come and gone, but the key has been this family that tends to stick together. And, you know, Dr. King did a lot. He said that he had a dream, and I saw Dr. King in my lifetime 3 times. One time he spoke about we're sleeping through a revolution. And another time he talked about the dream again. But now it's time to stop dreaming. Scripture said, it's high time we awake out of our sleep. And we've got to do some teaching.
Yes.
We've got to do some mentoring. We are confronting a challenge almost equal to segregation. And it's surfacing in North Carolina, it's surfacing in other places. But they'll never be able to return our constituency to the 40s because we know too much. We've been able, as I saw in Roots, the most significant scene to me was when the slave owner came in and he thought he saw Kizzy read. He knew that if Kizzy knew how to read, Kizzy could find out. And when you can find out, you have power. And that's what we're all a part of here.
And in December of 1973, going on what you were saying about power, the students led a strike that changed the whole direction of this college. And I don't want to name names because we're not, that's why I'm saying some of this stuff is, it's very what it is, all right? But the students led a strike because of a decision that was made. It was a political decision. And that political decision was that they were going to appoint someone to be vice president of this institution. They were not going to take into account that there were qualified people within the institution. There was also the issue that there was not adequate representation of minorities. Women were being looked over and they didn't have an opportunity to even apply for the position because of the way it was done. People went away, they came back, they had a vice president. The student body walked out and became involved in a major strike that shut the institution down. And it was wonderful to see. The strike was so effective that the court system had to issue an injunction to keep the faculty members and make the faculty go back to work because the faculty joined the students in the strike. Now the court couldn't order the students back, but because of the law, the court could order and did order the faculty members back. But what was so impressive and what came out of this that was so impressive is that it forced the college to begin to, because the press was so negative about what was happening here at the institution, it began to force the powers that be outside of the institution to look at all the nepotism that was going on, all of the jobs that were in the institution that were quite interesting. I want to show you something. I found this too. This is the organizational chart of Essex County College for 1970. Now one has to wonder, who are all these people? All these positions? Everybody getting a paycheck? But becomes questionable about, did any of these people really work here? Most of them did not work here. And so as a result of the student strike, you begin to see outside forces looking at what was really going on in this institution and beginning to recognize that this college was really a college that was a political dumping ground. A ground where people were paying off political debts by putting people in jobs here. You would go up to the 5th floor and you'd walk, and from the elevator all the way back, there were all of these desks. There was never anybody sitting in those desks, Bob. You know that.
Well, I hired them, I think.
I did hire them. So what came out of the student strike was that people began to look at what was really going on at the college. And we began to look at the fact that this college could be an outstanding educational institution. But in order for it to be an outstanding educational institution, we had to get rid of all the political interference that was going on in the institution. And we had to get rid of the fact that there was an attitude exterior to the institution that the students here couldn't learn, the students here couldn't be taught, and the students here didn't want to learn and didn't want to be taught. And none of that was true. That was the furthest thing from the truth. So the student strike began to really force people to look at what was wrong with this college and how it could be turned around and how it could be changed. And we began to see the next thing, of course, that really impacted on the institution was in 1981, the permanent appointment of Dr. A. Zachary Yamba as president. But just to deal with some of the inequities very briefly, if you could see what the increases were for administrators at the college during that period of time, and then what the increase was for a clerk typist. All right? If you were grade 1 administrator, your increment was $1,500. All right? If you were grade 1 clerical, your increment was $249. All right? If you were grade 4 and you were a repairman, your increment was $306. If you were grade 4, well, grade 1, 2, and 3 went the other way in administration. But the highest level administrative increases were $1,500. So what you had was you had so many people that were really doing the work of the college and working very, very hard, and these people were not getting increments. But then you had an organizational chart where all these other people were administrators and nobody knew who these people were, and they were getting these humongous increases every single year. And so it was very, very, very unfair, and it was very bad for the morale of the institution. Okay?
You know, Dr. Yamba was challenged. He was an interim president for a year before he became president. He was given a hard time. And Dr. Yamba had some allies on the board. A man by the name of Dan Gaby, Clara Dasher, whose name is on our student center, and he had Gus Henningford. And they banded together, and then Dr. Yamba was appointed. Plus, the gentleman who gave us the speech this morning was tremendous. Once he supported Dr. Yamba in kicking out, he even had cartoons kicking out all the political people.
Some of the cartoons right here.
And so, once that happened, the powers that be stayed away from this college for 29 years.
That's right.
They wouldn't come there, and I know a lot of those politicians, but they wouldn't dare send anyone over here and say that, you know, tell Dr. Yamba who to hire. So if he seems like a very esteemed and person who is revered, we have many reasons for that. He can leave this institution. I always used to say like a tray. You know, if you've been a waiter, it's a little heavy here, and he would catch it and would go here. He was fantastic in doing that. And I see some of the same qualities, if not a lot of them, the personable side of our new president. She sees people and feels people. She's a people person. And so we trust, as she asked all of us to be supportive of her, I think you're going to enjoy being supportive of her efforts and her vision.
And you young people may not have any understanding of really just how bad things were. This is just a cartoon. These shells need to be cleaned. And it says, Essex County College Administration, the Department of Higher Ed. This is what they were looking at: administrative chaos, learning deficiencies, partisan political influence, nepotism, low academic standards. This is what was appearing in the newspaper. The Essex County Administration, they needed to be swept out. Why? Because you had the Board of Trustees with patronage, jobs, funding, a SOS on top of the building. We were this close to totally being out of business. This close to totally being out of business when Dr. Yamba became the president of this institution. This college was in such bad shape until one of the first things Dr. Yamba had to do was he had to expel, what was 3,000 students? Close to 3,000 students.
Caught a lot of flack.
And he caught a lot of flack because recognized our enrollment wasn't that high. And he has 3,000 students that he indicates have to leave because of their lack of academic performance. And throughout the state, he was vilified by some of the very same organizations in the African American community and also in the Caucasian community, some of the very same groups that thought that had come together to talk about changing the college. they vilified him and said, in order to establish something, you got to do something different. And so what you have here in this institution that you guys are inheriting, you're inheriting it because people fought very hard. It wasn't easy. There was one time when they were cutting our budget, Bob, when Dr. Yama stood up in auditorium and said he had heard that there was going to be a student strike and a faculty walkout, and under no circumstances could that happen. And if it did, people would find themselves in very serious problems. We clearly understood what that meant.
Walk across the street.
We went across the street.
And may I say this, she's a hero to me because I know when she came to the college, I'm talking about my colleague, Professor Bridgeport here, she was a student. She was having difficult times. And how she took her children, and she taught here and there as an adjunct before she became chair of social sciences. And she is a study of inspiration all by itself. And I'm so proud of her because all of her, how many girls do you have? 3? Yeah. All of her college graduates, but she worked so hard and in building up social science. Social science was in a difficult position many times, and yet she pulled them through. And I want to express, as one colleague to another, we owe her
One other element, let me just say this to you also, and I'm going to show you this, all right? What we failed to realize is there was an awful lot of upheaval going on at the time, and it was a time when you had a lot of subversive activities going on. There was instances where people came to Essex County College and pretended that they were students, and they were sent here by the CIA. Wow. We have a photograph of an individual who was one of those people. He was a quote-unquote student, and of course we found out later on that he was also an informant. Ooh. Oh yes, and we have a photograph of that student, that person, all right? What I'm sharing with you is that it was more than just we were being, radical. You also had the threat of the government causing you a lot of problems, and the government sending people in to take very peaceful kind of activities and making them violent. So the students that were here at the time really had to be very, very careful about what they did and how they did it. Because this photograph of this individual, it was years later that we found out who he was. And
can I say this one other program that emerged, and I want to give him credit, and Art Taylor. Art Taylor and Scott Drackledge.
yes.
They looked into law, and they saw where a person could get, who didn't have a high school diploma, that they could get 24 credits at a college, an accredited college. Then they could automatically apply and get their GED. And what was born was one of the largest programs we've ever had, called Project Deep. And it was run by a woman who initially was on welfare. She ended up with a graduate degree from Rutgers. She passed away, unfortunately. But I want to give you, Scott, and I want to give Art Taylor. That program, matter of fact, we had younger students because their parents were coming. And we had enrollment problems. But that's a program that will always ring true and dear to me.
And one other thing too, one of the reasons why we had to be really careful with some of these government informants is because the money to actually begin to build the megastructure was given $2,247,000 by Rodino and Senator Case. And so there was some concern that the feds had about the level of radicalism that was taking place, which could have compromised this. And this is when they gave the check to the college to break ground to start the building of this megastructure.
I think it's very important to note that we were only 5 years older than the students. Mm-hmm. Most of the faculty
That's right.
close in age,
yeah.
And administrative. I mean, we're all young, wide-eyed.
Barely out of adolescence.
Without question.
but being very, very excited about what we were challenged to do. And that was the most important thing, that you felt that you were part of something larger than yourself. And you felt your life meant something beyond just yourself. And I think that's what I want most of the young people to take away from here. We are turning an institution over to you, because Bob and I are winding down. Scott, we're winding down.
I just started.
Our
You're
last
winding down.
50 years.
Oh, our last 50 years? Oh, heaven forbid, all right? But we are turning an institution over to you that was fought for. And we're saying to you that when the opportunity arises for you to fight, get up and fight for it. Don't just let people come in and do whatever they want to do. I often say that if times were reversed and we were organizing Essex County College now, I can tell you Essex County College would be in Rome. It would be. The faculty, are very lethargic. The students, you can't get them cracked up about anything other than, yo, what it is, da, da. I mean, it's just unbelievable just how distant they are from what's important. So we're giving you something that people fought long and hard for. And they fought with everything they had and turned it over to you. So what we're saying to you is take it to the next level and fight for it. Don't let anybody take anything away from this college. This college impacts on thousands and thousands and thousands of people's lives. All right? So with that, we'll take whatever little questions we can. Yes.
The question I have is the historiography that you presented in regard to 1967 riots in Newark, and also
Not riots.
I mean
rebellion.
rebellions. I'm sorry, rebellions. The rebellions in Newark. Very interesting information. Have you considered developing a manuscript to help include the history of Newark? Because that's a very important history of North America.
The president has made one of her goals writing of the history of Essex County.
Okay.
Good.
And
Good documentary.
I worked with her, and she was supposed to put it out today, but she'll be putting it out later. That's one of her goals, is to write the history of the college.
And we really need to, that which, and the history, I think part of it today is that there's some sensitive stuff here, because back in those days, like I said, people were not politically correct. And I don't want to be the kind of person that defames anybody's leadership, all right? And some of the stuff here is kind of raw. But it was a raw time. And I think in retrospect, if we roll it out properly.
More political workers over at the place where I vote than voters. And so we can't let that apathy. And we got to keep preaching.
But we also have a different type of student, all right? You have our students, many of them are going to Ivy League schools, many of them are being very successful. They don't relate to this particular place in time. They really don't. Their view is that I have worked hard, I've done what I'm required to do, I have finished college, I. And they really want to be judged based on their own individualized accomplishments. And so they don't necessarily see themselves as part of a larger picture. And if you're going to be involved in the social movement, one of the things you do have to see yourself as being a cog in a larger wheel. And this individualized culture that many of these students who are graduating with upper level degrees have, that is a contributory factor. I talk to young people sometimes that have PhDs. It amazes me the fact that they cannot understand, and we're talking about minorities, they cannot understand their responsibility, if you will, to their community. They don't see themselves. And so when you look at this kind of thing, it does contribute to where, why we find ourselves in a position where there are just certain things that go right over their heads. They don't see the impact.
I think it also has something to do with the way, it's a reflection of how we have prepared the next generation.
Well,
I think we have to take some responsibility for, my students, for example, your students. We have to take some responsibility for how we have prepared them to, take the baton and carry the torch.
But I was shocked last week. You saw that poll where 29% of the people of Louisiana felt that it was Obama's fault for Hurricane Katrina. There's an element of ignorance
Yeah, that's part of it.
that I can't believe, but it's there.
But also, our kids don't read. Our kids really do not read. If you were to go back and read the Governor's Select Commission on the civil uprising in the city of Newark, they have a whole section on the Hispanic community. I would guarantee you that 99.9% of the Hispanic community's leaders have never read that. And if they read it, it is really going to give them an insight into some of the challenges they have even today. And it was written back in the 1960s, and they haven't read it. So my point is that people just don't read things. They don't read history. They don't analyze things. And so there's a sense of what I call immediate scholasticism. In other words, whatever it is that is hot intellectually right now, we focus on. But we do it excluding a frame of reference. And that, I think, has something to do with what we're encountering now. But I think we're supposed to go now. aren't we? I hope it's interesting. If you want to look at some of this, you can.
Maybe you're terrific. Let's give